Hi there. My name's Laura and I'm the back half of Stellar Tandem, a record-breaking attempt to cycle around the world on tandem bicycle in 2022. And this is Stoked to be here, a podcast where we speak to people from the world of cycling and endurance to give us some tips and tricks along the way, and hopefully that you listeners will find useful as well. Today, I'm joined by Henry Gold, who is the owner and founder of TDA Global Cycling, which is a company that organises tours and holidays across 6 continents and 80 countries, I believe. So I think I'm going to get some fantastic advice. Hi, Henry, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. So how did this all start? Was it a case of cycling from an early age and it was just a passion that grew, or how did you get into the world of cycling and adventure?
No, as everything that happens to me anyway, always seems to be convoluted. Yes, I cycled from an early age. I grew up in Eastern Slovakia in a small village, in a village, I should say, not that small, but village. And I had a bicycle, and that was my mode of transportation as a child. I emigrated twice, so things changed. Eventually end up in Canada, and here bicycle wasn't really part of my life. I did have a bicycle during university times, which was stolen, and I did not replace it for many years. But I ended up working in my 30s I set up an NGO with a physician here in Canada, and I was the executive director for many years, and I worked in Africa, where one of the things I keep seeing is this, the picture that hasn't changed in some areas to this day, is people carrying everything on their back, particularly women. And I as a person who's trying to make a difference in those in different projects, I kept saying, somebody's got to set up a manufacturing of cheap bicycles for Africa. I thought, that we could make an impact by bringing bicycles for transportation purposes, because a typical person in Africa, a farmer, could never get his product to the market. I mean, the furthest the person could bring to the market would he essentially carry on a horse or on their back. Particularly in Ethiopia, where I was working most of the time, and during the 1984-85 famine. And so the idea of potentially setting up of doing something to set up a manufacturing of bicycles in Africa took hold. And I met someone from Canada who wanted to work with me, and he had an MBA, and we managed to get some funding. So he went to Nairobi to do a feasibility study. And when he did this, after 6 months, it looked promising. So we started looking at marketing the product, the bicycle, and since we had no money, we had to be very creative. And I came up with the concept of marketing through a bicycle race, Cairo to Cape Town, which is, by the way, something similar that, if I recall correctly, the Tour de France was created to market a newspaper.
Yeah, I believe it was. Yeah. So it's obviously a good, good ploy. It's worked.
so it stuck in my mind somehow, that we could use this, and that's how the concept took hold. My partner in the project didn't want to go on. He took a job with a consulting firm, and I sort of put this aside temporarily, and because I was busy with running the organization, and I was producing some films about Africa. But then I met someone here in Canada, a Dutch Canadian who was in the business of bicycling. He was a racer, very active. I just came back from Nairobi himself, but I think his friend was a son of one of the ministers, and he just loved the idea of doing a race across Africa. He didn't think of he wasn't interested in manufacturing bicycles. He just wanted to do the race, and. And it was preposterous because in those days there were sections of certain countries where you simply couldn't go. There were military zones, and trying to go, if they let you go to, it would be in a convoy only. It was a preposterous idea. Nevertheless, we decided we will do it in 1994. I think we were looking at it. And then there was a horrendous terrorist attack in Egypt, where about 40 to 50 German tourists were killed. And that was one of the first ones that had it had a big impact. So we put it aside. We decided it's not going to fly. We put it aside, and I kept on going with my life. He got into very serious car accident. Spent, I think, 4 months or 6 months in the hospital.
Oh dear.
So years went by until literally 2002. In February 2002, we're kind of again the start realigned. I was all of a sudden without a project, without anything crucial. I turned 50. I wanted to do a crazy adventure. I had nothing to risk. And I called him up and I said, Michael, are you interested? Because if we are going to do this, this is the time to do it. Because if not now, never. I'm just getting old. And he thought about it and he said, okay, I'll get back to you. And he did. And he said, let's do it. And that was February 2002. And then by January of 2003, we were standing from the pyramids. Myself with my partner there at that time, and 31 other cyclists and support crews. Very minimal support, but nevertheless we had two large vehicles, 2 large trucks, and we had no idea. We had no idea how we're going to make it. I mean, I had, I knew Africa, or at least some of the countries we were going through, but it wasn't scouted. There was limited information. There were these militarized zones. We had crossing borders with such a large group was a complete unknown. Food, water was for a group like that. Athletes, hungry athletes, was a major challenge. The roads, 40% of the time we were completely off-road, dirt roads that had traffic, but a minimal amount of traffic. So breakdown of transportation of bicycles, etc. Everything was unknown. But that's how I got into the business, if you will, of cycling, and I became a convert. I became a zealot.
Once you get the bug, that's it, isn't it?
Exactly.
Well and truly bitten. And had you done kind of much long distance cycling before that? Had you got much experience, or did you just learn it as you went along?
No, I didn't. I tell you, in the 90s, after I already had this idea, after we thought of Cairo to Cape Town, and as I said, we didn't do it in 1993. I didn't move to Israel, where I was working again in non-for-profit area, dealing with transportation issues mainly. So I got more and more interested in bicycling as an alternative to the use of vehicles, certainly in the city and small countries. And I also got involved in environmental and peace issues with Palestine and Israel. And so I was working there, and they had a kind of an event there in Israel from top to bottom of Israel, a 3-day event, bicycle. event, which every year people participated. Some, some serious cyclists and some total amateur. So I borrowed a mountain bike from a friend, and I think a week or 10 days before that, and decided to get myself into some kind of a shape in 10 days, and decided to do this. Well, I quit on the second day. I was completely I was completely broken.
Oh goodness.
And so that experience stuck in my mind. That I said I couldn't make it to a small country like Israel, and here I'm going to go through Africa. I mean, this felt so nuts.
Yeah.
But it taught me, failure is good because it teaches you a few lessons, including if you're going to do something, then prepare for it.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot in the preparation, isn't there? Yeah, and so cycling through Africa, I mean, that's a mind-blowing thing to consider for most people. And I know, ordinarily people would be, won't be worried about the dangers. I know you said about the politics and things like that, but of course Africa is known for its wild animals as well. I think people would, worry, are you going to get eaten by lions? What are you going to eat? How do you find water? What was like the biggest challenge in kind of that race? Was it getting food and water? Was it the roads, or kind of any inherent dangers along the way?
I think really it's the cumulative impact of going through unknown territories, not having scouted, not knowing where you're going to sleep every night, because we were camping all the way, except and even then we were camping. The tour was set up to broke into sections, and every section for roughly 10 to 14 days would end up in a big city, usually capital city. So that was the link, and that was a link by necessity to a certain extent, because we need to refuel, both food-wise and vehicles-wise and everything else, but also to connect with the outside world, because in those days cell phone communication existed, and I don't even think it existed much, two or three. We had satellite phone that didn't work very well, very expensive as well. So communication was so it's just the wear and tear of these cumulative little things that add, just add on. And the unknown, as I said, the unknown every day. Some of the rough roads, certainly in the rainy season, on a mountain bike, you were much faster than the big truck. So the racers actually got there before anybody could time them. So we had to, yeah. So we kind of had honor system, and we would tell them, today you're gonna go 100 or I'd say 90 kilometers. If it's a rough day, I mean dirt road. So you're gonna go down the 90 kilometers. You guys are gonna, we knew the leaders. There were usually 2, 3, 4 guys in the front, and said, and you guys just gonna time yourself. You're gonna stop and time yourself. And so it was a kind of a gentleman race, essentially.
Yeah.
And people took it as that, they took it as we are really breaking barriers and we're doing something unknown. And then they would come to 90 kilometers. The trucks weren't there, so they had nothing to do but sit and talk to the locals and buy themselves Cokes and wait. Wait until the vehicles arrive, and even then we would the vehicles could say, well, we can't stay here because we don't have enough space for 40-10. So they may have to end up getting back on the bike and do another 5 kilometers or 10 kilometers, until you find area. So we had that sort of a thing that was going on. But as I said, the most challenging thing was just the wear and tear on the body. Because water was minimal, food at times was, you're expanding so much energy. We were continuously all of us hungry. We were just starving. The bars and stuff like that, we had some, but how many bars can you carry with you? Meaning the vehicles, it wasn't like you can just go to any little town and buy additional stuff. Many places were, certainly when we went through certain section of a country like Tanzania, Sudan, Ethiopia, you know, the local shop. If you didn't like, you know, the little dry biscuits, there was not much else to eat. So it's certainly changed completely now. You know, it's not, you know, you go now to, there was no supermarket to be had in the Khartoum, capital city of Sudan, in 2003. You know, now there are plenty. Um, so stuff like that. Electricity was a challenge as on the way. So, you know, you're trying to get a cold Coke. Good luck. You had to drink. You had to drink what locals were drinking, which is one strong sugary tea, which, by the way, tastes great, but we have nothing else to drink.
Yes, I bet. I bet. Yeah, and it makes it a real feat of endurance, doesn't it?
And I think fear itself, you know, literally there were three individuals later on, as we were sure to make it, really acknowledged that they thought they're coming to die. They were thoroughly true type explorers. They were convinced that they're not going to make it alive.
Oh, wow.
And I believe them because they were crying when they were talking about it.
Oh,
you know, the emotional release. And these are, you know, adult males who were acknowledging how, you know, that how difficult it was for them psychologically, emotionally, just to go on this trip, because it was such a, and then each one had a different fear. You know, some feared animals are going to eat them. Others feel that they were going to be killed by locals, terrorism, you know, all sorts of stuff that people imagined that this was going to happen. I've worked in Africa for many years, so this didn't worry me. Not the animals and not the terrorism, not anything. I kept telling everybody, if you're gonna if you're gonna get hurt in Africa, it's gonna be from a driver. And I don't mean that in Africa. I meant, you know, I wrote a piece here 3 years ago in Toronto that I have more fear cycling in Toronto than anywhere else in the world. And of course, people look at me crazy. And I said, how can you say that? And I would explain very easily why. Because, you know, Toronto has a grid of very fast street. And sometimes you have no choice but to get on the street. And cars are zooming by you at 40, 50 miles an hour. You know, and there's no bike lanes, and you know, if you even do it for 200 yards, you know, and you have to compete with cars going by at that speed, you have no chance. If the car hits you, you're done.
Yeah.
You know, it's at a speed like this, you know. So often in Africa, it's actually better because the roads are so bad they can't go that quickly. You know, I cycled through India, and I remember a professor in the University of Hebrew University, transportation professor, always told me, Henry, nobody gets killed in traffic jams. Because the car can go fast. You know, it's the infrastructure in North America in particular was designed for cars in the cities to go fast, and that's why we pay the price. The cyclists and the pedestrians pay the price. So I kept telling our participants, you know, don't worry about anything else, because the most likely statistically, if you look at the numbers, you know, for every snake bites, there are 10,000 people killed by cars.
Yeah.
You know, and so yes, you could die from a snake bite, but the likelihood that if you're going to get killed is going to be a car accident, not nothing else.
Yeah.
And that you know, that turned out to be true. You know, we are now 19 years later. And the most serious incidents that happened with animals was ironically to me, and it happened in India in a rural area between two national parks. And as far as other incidents, yes, we had a cyclist killed in China by a car. You know, the driver had a flat tire, lost control of his vehicle, and again on a quiet road in the middle of nowhere, the driver was going obviously way too fast, and so you know, it just proves what I said. And as far as my concern, you know, it was kind of ironic because for years and years, I told everybody never to worry about wild animals, and here you are. It was me who was attacked by a wild elephant.
A wild elephant.
A wild elephant.
Did you get attacked by a wild elephant?
Well, very simply, I was cycling up a hill between two national parks without being informed by locals that, there are actually elephants sometimes wandering through the forest. And I was totally innocent when an elephant came rushing from a bush, and it was a narrow road, country road, between two national parks, and an elephant just charged at me. When I saw the elephant, he was running, and he would have been, I don't know, 10 yards, maximum 15 yards already from me, and just coming at
Oh
me
my
full speed.
goodness.
So completely unprovoked attack.
Mm.
And I'm lucky to be alive, frankly. I was serious damage, but I was spared somehow.
Yeah, my goodness. So were you, yeah, there's not a lot you can do in that case, is it? I assume you were knocked off and yeah.
Well, I actually wasn't knocked off because I fell before, meaning
Okay.
I was going up the hill. And when I saw the elephant charging, I realized that my only chances of getting away was making a U-turn and just step on it and go downhill,
Oh my
the
goodness.
law of gravity. But it was a very narrow road, and trying to stay on the pavement, I tried to make the U-turn, and I was already kind of in the middle of the road. So I fell. And when I fell, then I sort of thought, well, if I get into the forest and zigzag between the trees, then the elephant will have a hard time.
Mm.
So I took a interesting thought, which was I almost run in the direction of the elephant, trying to force him to make a sharp turn. And that kind of worked because I heard the elephant stepping on a bicycle.
Oh.
So I sort of, well, that the tactics work. Now I need to make another zigzag. I was by then in the forest, and at that instant I felt something grabbing me by the ankle, and I was in the air, and it was the trunk
Oh.
of the elephant,
Oh my
and
goodness.
I was in the air, and so the next brilliant idea was trying to go into fetal position. This is something that you heard from bear attacks in Canada, go into
Yeah.
fetal position. So I I decided, well, let's try that. And the next thought that I recall vividly was the helmet cracking,
Oh.
and I thought, well, this is very interesting. What happens next? And then what happened next is either deleted by the brain due to the circumstances,
Mm.
or I lost consciousness and woke up. Now I have no idea whether it was half a minute or 2 minutes, whatever it is. But at that point, I was lying flat on my back, and the elephant was already running away from me, literally disappearing into the forest again. Um, so at that point, I realized I was injured, and I lay there for a minute or two, just trying to assess the situation. And then I have done some wilderness first aid training. So then I try to assess what's broken, what works, what doesn't. I started moving my toes, and those work. So I said, well, that's good. And then I tried to move fingers, my fingers, and my right hand worked fine. My left hand wasn't totally immobile. So I realized there's a problem. Um, I had some pain in the back, so I was afraid I had a broken back. So stuff like that. But I pulled myself into a sitting position, and then I realized that I was quite badly hurt. I could hardly see from one of the eyes.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
so there was a cyclist ahead of me, and I had no idea whether she heard the attack or what. So I just decided to yell her name 2 or 3 times, and on a third time she responded, so she did hear me. So she must have heard either the elephant stepping on a bike or something, because I didn't scream. So I don't know what. But anyway, She came back. She was on the road. I said, stay on the road, get a phone and call an ambulance. And she kind of did that. And because she had her own phone, but I had the phone on the bicycle as well. So she called actually the tour leader who was ahead of us, and he called the ambulance right away. And I was rescued. Took me to a big city. I had an emergency surgery. Then it took another year. I had to have another surgery, but I recovered.
Yeah, that's.
I'm cycling the world.
Wow, that's yeah. It's amazing. It's an absolutely crazy story, and I've been looking into lots of people that have cycled around the world, and sadly there's a lot of people that do get knocked off bicycles by cars, people getting chased by dogs. But a wild elephant, that's something else entirely, isn't it? So
well, that my sister, when she heard that I was attacked by the elephant, but she realized I was in a hospital and I was in stable position, wrote an email saying, you always have to be different. You couldn't just fall off and break an arm or something. You have to be different than everybody else. So there you go. So kind of a black humor, but it was actually all the way through in an ambulance. My partner, my tour leader, was my partner in the training. We went through first aid training in the wilderness. So he was with me in the ambulance, and he was actually continuously checking, my blood pressure, etc., etc. And for 2 hours, I was cracking bad jokes to stay conscious and to keep him relaxed and everything else. So to this day, I said I apologize for putting you through for 2 hours of terrible jokes.
Oh my goodness. That is an incredible story.
Yeah.
Wow. And how did going back to your first carried Cape down the Tour d'Afrique race, how did that go? How was it? Was everybody successful? Did everybody finish? What was the kind of result of that first attempt?
Well, we finished. We set it up in such a way that we spent 100 days cycling, and we had sort of 20 days of what we call rest days in between. So, for example, when we reached Nairobi, we had a rest day there. When we reached Arusha, we had a rest day so people could go and visit the parks. All together was a 120-day adventure, and there's a lovely story which I like to tell, which I didn't tell to the riders at the time. That on the final day, we again we had no idea how long it was going to take us to get to the final line where the family and some media was waiting for us. By then, people knew that we were doing it. So the media was aware of it. We got to, I don't know, about 10 kilometers from Cape Town, maybe even less. And we were about an hour and a half early than we were planning. And I sort of panicked, we were going to get to the finish line. There was nobody there, no family, no media. It's going to be terrible. So I stopped everybody, and I didn't tell them why I stopped them. I said, there are some issues at the front. We're going to have to sit around here and wait. And I was kind of giggling to myself because people told me over and over again, you're crazy. This cannot be done. It's not going to work out. You're risking your life. Henry, you've gone mad. My friends were telling me you've gone mad. And there was all kinds of negativity before. So here I was sitting beside the road, supposedly waiting for a phone call, but giggling to myself. I said, it couldn't be done, but now I have to make sure that everybody sits here for an hour and entertain them. Everybody is restless. They want to see their families and girlfriends and boyfriends, and people were emotional. So as I was giggling to myself, they were just kind of loitering around and waiting to go. So we made it. We had one person who fell in Sudan and got hurt, and went home, Canadian guy. And we had another American guy who quit in Nairobi because his house in Washington was flooded, and he panicked. And to this day, he wrote an email a few years ago. To this day, he regrets that he never finished that. But he was a racer. He was one of the top racers. I think he went home more because he realized he wasn't going to win, and his ego was on the line. But maybe there are other reasons, and maybe he was right. Maybe it was just a panic, or maybe he was just, it was a very difficult challenge. It's a mental challenge, as you well know.
Yeah.
Any physical activity is to a large extent a mental challenge. And if you, for whatever reason, start doubting, we had a Canadian guy who kept asking me if we are going bankrupt because he wanted to go home, but he couldn't quit by himself. That's another ego thing. I was so sick and tired asking him. Him asking me, how are we doing financially? How are we doing financially? Are we going to make it? Are we going to make it? He was asking him because he wanted to go home.
Wow.
People later said that, that often they thought about quitting and going home, but then there was a peer pressure. If nobody else is quitting, then I can't go by myself. I can't quit. I can't look terrible like this. So, and we did have a serious car accident, which again, the gods were on our side because nobody was seriously hurt. When I first came to the site of the accident, I thought that the cyclist was hit. There were two cyclists. There were actually three cyclists that were hit. One wasn't hurt at all. Another one looked like he was hurting badly, and a third one was just the person who was hurt most was literally lying on a windshield of the car.
Oh my goodness!
Blood was coming from his mouth. The windshield was completely cracked. The bicycle was in pieces. And when I got to the scene, my first thought was, he'll never walk again. I was sure he had a broken neck because he landed on a windshield with his helmet on his head.
God.
I mean, imagine the impact, threw him up into there. And I was convinced that he'll never walk again. Anyway, the same evening in the hospital, the doctor walked out and says, no broken bones, no damage. We're going to keep him overnight for observation, and tomorrow you can pick him up.
Gosh,
and the same thing with the second rider, who was also X-rayed head to toe, no internal injury, nothing. He was black and blue, bruised all over. And believe it or not, a week later, they were both cycling again. So, they finished. Obviously, they didn't do the whole thing.
Yeah.
Many of us didn't cycle every inch, which was, by the way, what we did at that time, I approached Guinness World Record and said, and proposed to them that we're going to do Cairo to Cape Town, and first human power crossing of Africa. And they accepted that. But they gave me conditions that anybody who's going to be part of it is not allowed to get into the vehicle, not even for a mile. So it has to be all human powered, and we did that. And so I think 8 or 9 of the cyclists managed to do that, and they were the first one who established the Cairo to Cape Town record, who's since then been broken many times. And it became a thing to do. People come to us, people who are attempting, asking for advice. But we were the one who established it.
Yeah.
So that's my claim to fame. I wasn't one of them, but I proposed the whole thing to Guinness.
Well, it's a massive achievement, and as you say, the conditions back then were so different and so challenging, and just being the first to prove, as you say, that you could do something, especially when everybody kind of didn't believe you could. That's those first few have always got that's kind of special achievement, haven't they? And I believe kind of since then you still run the Tour d'Afrique, but it's no longer a race. I think it's just now as a tour, as a challenge in its own right.
Yeah, it's an expedition. We now in the company have different type of tours around the world. We divided into expedition, adventure, touring, and now we're starting bikepacking tours. And it was a race originally. It wasn't working well. As this condition got better and the racers were making demands, it just didn't work as a combination between the two. The racers have one focus and other people have a different focus, and there was a lot of tension and complaints on both sides, etc. So we had to make a decision to go one way or another. And since I was not a racer, and my original idea was to bring people to Africa and let them have experience of Africa. Racers are racers, they can, because you're trying to do something very fast. You don't have the opportunity to really. You still do some of it, but not to the same extent of, enjoying the locals and it's everything. If you eat fast, you're not going to enjoy the food when you eat slow. You'll satisfy your belly, but
yeah.
So it's the same thing. You're going to cross the country very fast. It's a tremendous achievement. It's a wonderful thing. I used to be active. In college, I played soccer for a college team, and I enjoyed sports tremendously. I wasn't good at it, but I enjoyed it. I was a journeyman in everything I tried. But that's fine. I was competitive in that sense, but it's, as I said, doing something as a race or a competition is a very different thing than just being in a place and taking the sights and doing whatever you can. And so we made a choice. And as I said, now we do different thing for different type of individuals, because again, we know there's so many, the whole idea of exploring the world on bicycles can be enjoyed on so many different levels. And that's all we're trying to push, come and enjoy the places, enjoy being outdoors, enjoy the activity, enjoy the people around you. The camaraderie on these trips are remarkable. That's our approach. And the bikepacking is another way. What we did about Africa, Tour d'Afrique, which was unique, I think, was that we give people who, the top athletes, people probably like yourself, you don't need support of like if you want to do, you're going to do it. But most people will not do it. You have to prepare the ground for them. You have to provide them the security, the confidence, the support when their bicycle breaks down, when they get sick, etc. So the average individual will never go to Africa unless there's that kind of support. And so we created that kind of a support structure that you can still have a tremendous adventure, but be part of a group. And we are sort of looking at possibly doing something the same with bikepacking. Bikepacking, the young people who want to go bikepacking will go bikepacking no matter what. But the people my age right now, to go bikepacking, who am I going to find, who still wants to do it at my age? But I want to do it by myself. There's all kinds of challenges to go by myself. So I'm now trying to figure out a way we're going to go bikepacking. But have minimal support, have someone with us who has the skills, who will, who can help us. And if we get into trouble, there's someone to call help and get us out of there and so on. So that's the approach. We're having our first bikepacking trip this year in Quebec City. And then we have other trips coming up. There are so-called touring trips. We're going to be first time ever for me, anyway, and for us going to southern USA, a 2-month-long trip coming up in September. We have a kind of a touring trips on the east coast of Canada and the west coast of Canada. And then we have the expedition coming up, the Tour d'Afrique again in January. We have this amazing 2 epics, North American epic and South American epic. Wow. Believe it or not, 5.5 months on a bicycle. boy, if you ever have a desire to get away from it, this is it. This is the way to do it.
That sounds amazing.
Wonderful trips, wonderful trips. We have other trips in Transoceania and European, lots of European trips for the more traditional approaches to touring. Again, we were the first one who designed a trip across Europe. To my shock and surprise, people were always doing it by themselves. And there were a lot of 10 days holiday or 5 days holidays in Europe. So many of them. But to my shock and surprise, there wasn't a trip that covered, Europe, east, west, northeast, whatever, that you cross boundaries, you go through borders. And it puzzled me. It puzzled me there was no trip between Canada and US that crossed borders, the so-called friendly border.
Yeah.
I could never understand why. So anyway, that's where we broke new ground. We said, why be intimidated? What do you worry about? So that's where we became specialists. And in fact, New York Times called us, the leading long distance cycling operator. That's our specialty. That's what we're good at. Sometimes I joke around that we are actually a logistic company that happen to be cycling, because we are able to solve the problems that are needed in order to do this sort of thing. And most cycling companies, touring companies, are intimidated by this sort of thing. You also have to have a geopolitical knowledge, what's doable, what's not doable, how to get through borders, how to get through when some officials decided that you shouldn't be doing this, and his authority is more important than anything else. So how are you going to deal with those individuals, and so on. And that's what we specialize in. That's what we know how to deal with, and we get through somehow.
Yeah, that's...
And every day is a challenge. And if you're gonna do those trips, and if you do it individually, this. You're gonna face those things.
Yeah.
And again, you're gonna have to figure it out by yourself, how to do it. For an individual, it's different because you don't have the whole group depending on you. It's one thing, as an individual, you can also figure things easier, than a group of 30, 40, 50 people. You can't sneak around an obstacle with 40 people. You could do it by yourself, but much more difficult. Anyway, that's our company. We're very proud of what we do. We have great fun. And we have international participants from all over the world because of this.
Yeah, and I think that's it's a really standout point, isn't it? It's just the breadth of what you cover. It's not just one continent. It's literally worldwide, isn't it? And I think it's really, really interesting there that you you talk about like the different levels of support you provide. And I would assume, do you have, what sort of people come on your trips? Is it old people, young people, or is it a complete mix? Is it professionals, people taking time out from their work? Or does it just open it up to anybody that wants to explore the world on a bicycle?
Well, in general, absolutely. We are trying to encourage participants of all level, and that happens on expedition trips in particular. That we get the younger crowds, and we get literally people 70, even plus.
Yeah.
And one of the most enjoyable things for me to watch on those trips is that a young person who will generally, unless they're talking to their grandpas and their grandmas, don't really spend much time with older people. They don't make friends with older people. And what happened on this trip is actually exactly opposite. My 17-year-old niece came with me on trip. Now she's not 17, she's 24. But she came on a trip when we did through Indonesia and Australia. And she became a very good friend with one of the riders, who was, I think, in his late 60s. And he was taking care of her, he was supporting her, and so on. And it was so nice, so lovely to watch, from both sides. Me and her were not getting along very well. And so she had another friend, who was kind of keeping an eye on her. But you see that kind of a camaraderie because you depend on each other. You could be a young one and get a flat tire and your pump is not working, and then an old guy who's very slow comes by and it's, oh, come, I'll help you, I'll do it for you. And and the discussion evolves. The next thing, there's all kinds of things that are revealed about each other, and you enjoy your company, each other's company. So on the expedition tours, that happens a lot. On the classical touring trips that, we are more expensive, where we are staying in hotels, in Europe, for example, younger people don't show up as much because first of all, they can do it themselves, but there are other reasons that they don't come up. So depending on a trip and a tour, we get different countries coming. So for example, in Europe, we won't get many Europeans participating in European trips. And so on the other hand, as I said, the expedition get cross sections from everybody. And that's really, for me, as I said, it's part of the joy, because it really, again, for me, I'm always interested to know about people, from where they come from, what they do, and so on. So having that sort of a range of participants just adds to the joy of the trip.
Yeah, and I bet people come away with so much experience, new friends, and having learned a lot from each other as well. And do you find people then more able to go like on their own trips? Does it give them more confidence to maybe go out and go camping on the bicycle?
Absolutely. One of the most interesting thing I think that happened when people come on an expedition trip, then realize, yeah, I can do this by myself. I don't need you anymore. And they go with, we never see them again. They go around. The best story, the most classical story, is a South African woman who came with us. I think it was our 4th trip across Africa. And she was the first woman who actually did what we call the EFI. The second, the so-called Guinness approach, that you cycle every inch of it. So she was the first one on Tour d'Afrique who actually did this. Not a young woman; she would have been in her 40s, but 2 years later, I got an email from her saying, "I sold my business, and I'm cycling around the world, and I believe she hasn't stopped. She's written a book or two."
Wow.
And so that's the most classical case. But we have had people, again, what happens on these expedition trips is very interesting. Everything from marriages breaking down and new marriages are established.
Oh, goodness.
New relationship, but people making life changes. People come and decide, I'm selling my business, or I'm getting out of my partnership. I had enough, or I don't want to do this anymore. To all kinds of resolution people make. One of my most enjoyable stories is a French Canadian guy from Quebec who came on a trip, and he was being interviewed by a local media, and he was just mentioning how the tour to Africa changed him, and the reporter asked him, "So give me an example." Well, he said, "Well, before I went to Africa, I thought I'm gonna go on this trip, and then when I come back, I'm gonna." The reporter asked him, "So what actually changed?" And he said, "Well, I thought that I'm spending a lot of money on myself and being to Africa, and then I'm gonna come back and spend a lot of money on fixing my home, particularly the bathroom. I need to fix it up and spend $15,000, $20,000 on remodeling the bathroom." And so she said, "So what happened?" "Well, I came home, I took a look at the bathroom. I said, the bathroom is just fine the way it is. I'm not spending any money on it." And this is changing because you change your priorities.
Yeah, definitely.
All of a sudden you realize, what, I can enjoy myself by spending $15,000 on another adventure and other things, rather than than spending it on changing my bathtub and my toilet seat. And that's exactly what happens on those trips. You just realize what's more important to you and what's not.
Yeah, definitely. How do you choose the routes? I mean, you've got the whole world to choose from. How do you choose where to go and what roads to follow? You've obviously got a lot of experience traveling, but it must be an exciting task.
Well, that's the most part, trying to figure out what you want to do and where you want to go. So you do everything that you think are going to be of interest to people, and but you got to sort of give yourself, if you're going to go across a country, you can't do too many zigzags. So
Yeah.
you got to kind of decide what's most interesting and what's doable and what are the obstacles and so on. So in some places you don't really have much of a choice. Going through Africa the first time was Cairo to Cape Town. There were not that many choices to go through. There were
Yeah.
very few roads, and you had a few choices to go through. And often, if you wanted to go a different way, you had to add, several days, and that just wasn't practical because time is limited to how much can you go. And other times you have to make difficult choices between something very iconic to see, and then you decide, well, we're going to go there in spite of everything, because I want to go to Big Falls. If I'm coming to Africa, I'm going to go to Big Falls.
Mm.
Got to see Big Falls. Same thing, perhaps, you got to go through close to national parks so that you can go on a safari. You've never been to Africa, you got to go to on a safari. So you're going to
Yeah.
make sure, okay, I'm going to take this route rather than the other route. So those are the choices you make. But you're also trying to look at the perspective of the person who's never been to these places. What would they like to see? What's of interest, how can you keep them motivated and focused and so on. So but yeah, you're limited often the practical aspects. You can't go that route because there's no border crossing.
Yeah.
As much as you would like
Yeah.
to go, there's no official border crossing, so you don't have a choice.
Mm.
So certain things are limited by the reality, and the knowledge you accumulate, what's doable and what's not doable. Sometimes we go through certain things and we actually have to work with the local authorities to get special permits to go through this. As an
Goodness.
individual, it'd be very difficult to do it, but as a group, we negotiate. Sometimes we start way ahead of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
We negotiate, and they help us. Sometimes the contact. The reason Tour de Afrique happened, to be very, very frank, the first Tour de Afrique happened is because of my work in Africa.
Mm.
If I didn't have the credibility of being there and helping some of these countries and having the right people that helped me get the permits, without them, it wouldn't have happened.
Mm.
It would not have happened. So, you ask how I got involved in this, and I said, sometimes in life, you do certain things that you have no idea how it's going to be useful. And later on.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. I literally got permits to go through those military areas and some of the difficult spots by contacting my old friend. And I said, remember me? I need help. I need help. I need help to get permit for this. And believe it or not, I got emails back saying, Henry, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it.
Oh wow. Yeah.
And how many, so how often does that happen, right, in life, where somebody says to you something like this that sounds completely crazy? You're going to get me permit to cycle through militarized zone?
Yeah.
And that's what happened. That's what happened in northern Kenya. That's what happened in Egypt. That's what happened in Ethiopia. To this day, in some of these countries, Egypt, you can only go through with a convoy. And we go year after year by ourselves.
Wow.
And I said by ourselves, I don't mean as a group, we go at a pace. Everybody gets up in the morning, eats their breakfast, packs their stuff, puts it in a vehicle, and then they take off. Some go, some are, can't wait. So they don't even eat breakfast. They just go, or they put something in their pocket, and another, like me, spend another half an hour loitering around before we get going. So the spread between the cyclists can be 20, 30, 40 miles, as we go. So it's not like we are bunched together as a peloton and going to place
Yeah.
and easy to keep an eye on. And yet, we managed to do it. They allow us to do this. And we have had, by the way, cyclists in Africa, foreign cyclists, who wait for us to join us to go through this, because they are not allowed to do by themselves.
Yeah.
So there have been cases like people like that who literally plan. They look at our schedule and try to time themselves so they can join us, and they come sort of what's the word I'm looking for? It's kind of ask the tour leader, can I cycle with you for a day or two? And the other thing that's nice on this, again, these expedition trips in particular, is how should I put it? The type of people that show up. So we have, you have very wealthy people who all of
Mm.
a sudden are sleeping in tents right beside you.
Oh
And you
yeah.
have and you have the factory workers who have saved for years and years and years and are coming on this trip.
Oh
And
wow.
again, that's nice because a typical wealthy
Yeah.
people does not mix with factory workers unless it's his own factory.
Yeah, yeah.
um, and it was designed in such a way, egalitarian way. So, for example, on expedition, we set up a routine where every few days, two or three people wash the big pots that we cook in.
Yeah.
We prepare the dinner and we do everything, but and there are some wealthy people say, I have never washed a pot in my life. Well, I look at them and I say, well, guess what? You're gonna wash your pot. And he said, no way. And I said, well, yes, you will. Or you're not eating, because that's the part of being part of this team. It's the group behavior. It's the expedition behavior. You want to be part of this team, you're going to do it. And they look at me, they're very unhappy, they complain, they go away. Sometimes they pay money to someone to go and take their turn. And if we find out that happened, we just say, you can't do it.
Yeah, yeah.
So again, it's part of the design. I know people don't like it,
Mm.
but it's part of keeping that group cohesive and sort of egalitarian, if you will. And at the end, it works.
Yeah, yeah. And it's all got to be the teamwork, isn't it? And yeah, unless the
Yeah.
group works together, it's not going to work out. No, it sounds amazing. I mean, yeah, to have such a mix of people as well, I think is a real benefit too. So as you say, visas and getting cross borders, that's obviously one big challenge. It's one of the big challenges I think we'll face as well. But what do you think will be like our big challenges kind of on our trip, traveling around the world on a tandem with just the two of us? We're kind of used to the cycling and the camping, but we've kind of ridden in Europe quite a bit, but not really beyond. What do you think is going to challenge us particularly?
I think the mental challenge is the most difficult. Always. You're going to have windy day, rainy day, bicycle breakdowns, and two people, each one has a different reaction to it. So ideal, the best team always is when one is down, the other one picks up, and carries the attitude. My business partners didn't work out in Tour d'Afrique, the company we set up. But I always give him credit that when I had these bad days initially, when we thought we're stuck, this is not going to happen, and he was lazy and he was, all sorts of challenges. But whenever he saw that I'm done, that I'm not willing to carry this anymore, then he realized, okay, now I got to pull my socks, I'm going to do it. And it was 3 or 4 or 5 occasions, but without him, it wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have happened because, you need that kind of a support in crucial times. So, this is a sort of a thing that you have to pay attention to your partner and he has to pay attention to you.
Yeah.
And when the things get going, when the cliche, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Yes. That's when you have to, more than anything else, that's the biggest challenge, because the tough, you're gonna have all sorts of unexpected things.
Yeah.
And the only way to prepare for them is to know they're coming, and to watch, work as a team in those situations and help each other and get through it. And it works, it always happens on every team. You're gonna have a bad day, and at that time, that's when you need particularly moral support, physical support too, but moral support is always the key. It's always attitude. It's always attitude, and that's gonna, you've been on a bicycle for 6 hours, 8 hours, 10, 12 hours, your body aches, and all of a sudden something happens, and what you need right now is to figure out, okay, dig in deep.
No, that's great advice, and yeah, hopefully we will be supporting each other all the way around. But yeah, I think you're dead right. The mental challenge is the one.
My other piece of advice that I always tell people, again, you're going around foreign countries, foreign places, you get yourself into trouble. And at the end, the only way you get yourself out of trouble is by local support.
Yeah.
Meaning, meaning local people are. We have fears of unknown. We have fear of people we don't know. But the truth is that 9 times out of 10, maybe 99 times out of 100, the local people will help you.
Yeah.
They're supportive, they're interested, they look at you, you're vulnerable, they know you're vulnerable. You're on a bicycle, by definition, you're vulnerable.
Yeah.
You look tired, you are dirty, you're smelly, you're hungry. And guess what? That's when the local people say, yeah, there are these people. I always say there are angels all over the world. You have no idea the angels, but whenever you need them, all of a sudden they show up. And I always give example. It happened to me, how I think. God knows how that happened, but that angel showed up. He was a human being. He looked like a human being, but but I'm convinced he was an angel. I think, again, that's another piece of advice I tell people: do not be afraid. It doesn't mean that you're not going to be robbed or something. Some attempt. This happens. This happens. But generally, majority of people are actually opposite. They go out of their way to help you.
Yeah, and that's what I've heard from anybody I've spoken that's travelled further afield, is that people are good and people will want to help, and we should make use of that where we can. So it's a very reassuring thought, and I think one of the things we're most excited about is going to meet a lot of humanity, essentially. Just before we finish off, because I won't keep you much longer, but I've got some tandem trivia questions for you. So the first one is, okay. Have you ever ridden a tandem?
If I did, it would have been like for 2 minutes. No, I can't recall. I'm trying to think if I did or not. But it would have been only trying, we had some tandems on our trip, so it would have only been trying to, but I don't think so. I may have sat on it, but I don't actually think I actually went with a partner.
And say you were to ride a tandem, and you could ride a tandem with anybody in the world. They could be alive, dead, famous, not. Who would you choose to ride a tandem with?
Who would I choose to ride a tandem with? I'm trying. I don't know. It's a hard question. Probably someone who is a good storyteller.
Yeah. We've had people pick comedians and things like that before. So somebody with a bit of entertainment.
Yeah. Probably it's someone. I mean, the important thing is to share. Someone you feel sharing things with. I can't think at this point who I would do it with.
And I think you can probably imagine as well, there's quite a difference to being on the front, being in control of the steering and the brakes and things like that, or to be on the back. And they often say you've got your feet up on the back, which I can assure you is not the case. But do you think you'd want to be on the front or the back?
It's an interesting question. Ideally I would like to switch.
Do a bit of both. That's a great answer.
Yeah, do both. I think that's the most important thing. Again, part of sharing, part of experiencing things from both sides. Very important to me. I would always, if feasible, I would try to not even have a routine, but just be able to share the feeling.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And then we often say that the tandem, we're joined by the frame to each other, so it's like we're inseparable. If you're out on one of these tours, these expeditions, and you're riding your bike, is there anything that you're inseparable to? Be it like, is there a type of food you always take? Do you always have to have your coffee in the morning, or is there a bit of kit? Is there something that you would always take with you on a bike trip as maybe a bit of a luxury or a bit of a necessity?
For me, no. I always buy local, what's available. I like to stop by local stand. I like fruits a lot, so they're usually available everywhere. I like different nuts, so again, often in season they're available. So I do that a lot. I like trying local drinks, so again, I like to stop everywhere and You can't do that if you're racing or if you're doing stuff. So, but my approach is always go local as much as possible for many reasons. One, it's fresh. Two, it's probably not going to get you sick because it's fresh. Three, because I like to experience something different. So to me, it's always important. And as I said, most likely, again, food-wise, people get sick on this trip. My advice is you come to a place, ideally see which is the most popular place people are going, locals are going. If they're going there, there's a reason they're going there, because it's probably enjoyable, because it's probably fresh. And hygienically it may not look appealing to you, but it's probably the best place not to get sick.
No, that's another great tip as well. One last question, if I may. Why should we cycle around the world on a tandem bicycle?
Why not?
No, that's amazing. And yeah, thank you so much for all the advice, Henry. You've been a real inspiration, and I'm sure I could hear you talk about all your amazing trips all day. Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. And yeah, thank you so much.
Pleasure is mine, and keep us posted. We'll post this, but we'll post your progress as well.
Oh, that'd be fantastic. And yeah, hopefully when we're done with all this record breaking nonsense, we might come on holiday with you.
There you go.